a chatbot can be responsive. It can sound warm and it can affirm your child, but it doesn't need anything from your child. And by that, I mean, it doesn't ask them to share. It doesn't expect them to wait or apologize or listen to a story that takes time, notice someone's body language, or stay present when someone else's needs are different from their own. It's not asking them for anything.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. A few weeks ago, one of my clients sent me a message about her children's school. It was Reconciliation Week here in Australia, which is an annual event that invites Australians to learn more about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, cultures, and their achievements, and to think about reconciliation from a personal perspective. Her children's school recognized Reconciliation Week in a way that really stood out for her, and she wanted to share that with me. And when she shared it, it really stood out for me. You see, the easy option of going about recognizing Reconciliation Week would have been to have perhaps a mention in assembly, couple of posters here and there in the school, maybe even a gold coin donation. And then everyone moves on from that. They've kind of ticked a box, they've done it. But what this school did, I feel, was so much more impactful. And it's kind of formed the gist of this whole conversation that I want to have with you today. So this is what they did. They wove activities into the whole week. The children were learning every day in age-appropriate ways with their hands. They were busy. It was practical stuff. They were asking questions, and questions were welcomed. And across those days, the school invited First Nations educators and experts to teach the children directly, and they were in the same space together, so they were interacting with them. And the school also donated money, but the donation was not the only thing they did in terms of, getting the kids to come in and give those gold coin donations. But they did so much more. And I'm not, having a go at making donations. I think making donations is great and it makes a big, big difference. But often writing a check can sometimes be the easier thing to do. It's really quick, it's clean, it's easy, and it gives us a sense that something has been done. Instead, this school chose the path that wasn't necessarily convenient. And what I notice is that they centered relationship. Now, I want you to keep that thought in mind because the whole episode today comes back to that. And so I'm sharing today about raising anti-racist kids in an AI world. Now, you might think Reconciliation Week in a primary school and artificial intelligence, Annie, what do those two have in common? They should be two separate conversations. but they're not. They're deeply connected, especially when you look at it from the perspective of who is responsible in helping your child understand race, history, belonging, difference, and humanity. Our children are being formed all the time. They are learning from what we say, what we do. They're also learning from what we do not say, what we rush past, what we treat as normal, and many times what we allow to go unchallenged just because perhaps it feels a little uncomfortable. One of the things I feel we get wrong as adults is we assume children don't notice race until much, much later. A lot of adults still believe that if we don't talk about race, children will grow up seeing everyone the same. But that is not how children learn. Children will notice the rhythms of everything from a very early age. They notice skin color, they notice who is in the books, who's missing. They will notice who gets praised and perhaps who gets in trouble. And they may not have the language for it, obviously. They don't have language for this is racism or colonization, stereotypes, racial biases, but they are taking in messages all the time. So, silence does not protect children from racism. Silence simply becomes part of the lesson that they carry with them. In fact, I know this to be true because some of my students have mentioned that race was a no-go topic growing up. And so from an early age, learning to look at race through a negative lens became something that was normal for them, but they didn't even know that they were forming those negative opinions. But it was because it was hashed down, it was taboo. We don't talk about that. Now, if a child notices difference and every adult around them avoids talking about this, guess what? They still learn something. And they may learn that race is a bad word. They may learn that difference is embarrassing, that adults are uncomfortable with certain questions, and it's better to stay quiet than to ask. That's why I truly believe raising racially aware children requires more than teaching them to be kind to everyone. Yes, it's good to teach kindness, but when it comes to matters of racial literacy, kindness, it doesn't begin to scratch the surface. It is such an incomplete picture if that is all we are teaching them to do, to be kind to everyone. I really love Howard Stevenson's perspective on racial literacy. He's a clinical psychologist, and you should check out his work on racial literacy, where he describes it as something we practice in real encounters. It's the ability to read what is happening in a racial moment, hear this, notice what it brings up in the body, and respond with more skill and care. I love that so much because it reminds us that racial literacy is not a fact you give a child once and then you're done. No, it's a skill. Children learn it by practicing, asking questions, getting something wrong, and are, the key word here, lovingly corrected. They learn it when they hear stories from people whose lives are directly affected by the things that they're going through, whose lives are different from their own. And when they see adults stay present in a conversation that feels uncomfortable, they're watching you. And I can liken this skill, this learning, this being able to respond with care that Howard Stevenson is talking about. I can liken this to learning to swim. You see, you can describe swimming to a child. Show them the pool, buy them the goggles and the bathers, you know, But at some point, they will need to get in the water. They will need to get wet. They'll need to go in and understand the concept of you cannot breathe underwater. You need to hold your breath. Understand how to move and glide in the water. Understand how to get out safely and get in safely. Understand how to dive and not make, belly flops. You can't teach that by just saying it to them. They need to practically do it. And that's what this school did during Reconciliation Week. I feel like they put the kids in the water. They didn't just tell them about Reconciliation Week and what and how important it is and that they should recognize it. They created opportunities for the children to learn from First Nations people directly in the same space. And this is where the rise in the use of AI in schools makes this conversation a lot more urgent. Here in Australia, the e-Safety Commissioner released research this year, 2026, from a survey of nearly 2,000 children aged 10 to 17 years old. And 79% of them had already used an AI assistant or companion. 79%. AI is helping children with homework, answering questions, creating images, writing stories, explaining history, suggesting ideas. And in the process, some AI tools are also starting to feel less like tools and more like a friend. They feel warm, responsive, available, and agreeable. Now, I'm not saying AI is bad. No, that is not what I'm saying. It can support learning, creativity, access, and productivity. But AI is not a wise elder or a trusted community member. It is not a First Nations educator sitting in a classroom with children, bringing story, history, place, and relationship into that space. Now, AI can give a child an answer, but it cannot replace relationship. One of the reasons AI can feel so convincing is that it often looks like a plain window onto the world. A child asks a question and an answer appears. It can feel clean and factual, as though the machine is simply giving them the truth. But AI systems are shaped by human beings, human decisions, human data, and human histories. They are trained on material from a world that already has racism, sexism, colonialism, and inequity. So when a child receives an answer from AI, they are not receiving something untouched by the imperfect world we live in. They are receiving something shaped by what has been collected, what's been labeled, what's been included, excluded, and treated as this is normal, this is correct. This is where the work of Abeba Birhane is so helpful, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name properly. She's an Ethiopian cognitive scientist and AI ethics researcher whose work challenges the idea of technology and how that can be separated from relationship, power, and context. Her work reminds us that data is never just data. It comes from somewhere. It reflects choices. It reflects what certain people have decided is worth collecting and naming and what is kept. Her research has also shown that harmful labels and stereotypes can sit inside the data sets AI systems learn from. In other words, racism does not disappear because it has been absorbed into a machine. And I know you get that. It can be reproduced through the machine while still looking objective. And that's something that children don't understand or know. Dr. Joy Buolamwini, who I've mentioned before when I speak of AI, and Deborah Raji's work gives us another concrete example here. Their research into facial analysis technologies showed that these systems performed far worse on darker skinned women than on lighter skinned men. The machine had been trained in a world where lighter faces had been treated as what is normal, and the technology reproduced that. Now, your child may not be using facial recognition technology. They may simply be using AI to help with a school project. But the lesson, hear me when I say this lesson still applies. Machines can hold the biases of the world that built them while presenting those biases as truth, as ordinary. Now, this is where I need you to really lean in, my friend, because when your child uses AI, the goal should be to help them build the habit of asking better questions, better prompts. And this is something I have done with my daughter. When AI gives them an answer, ask, who is being centered here? Who's the hero? Whose story is missing? In other words, what other perspectives could be useful here? Does this answer make one group of people look like the problem? Who else should we learn from before we treat this as the whole story? Can we find a book, person, an educator, or a community voice, even a documentary that gives us a fuller picture? You see, those questions are simple enough to ask at the kitchen table when you're busy making dinner. You can ask them while helping with homework, when your child is looking at an AI generated image, when they're trying to research a country, culture, or historical event. Those are some questions that you can bring in, and just begin to open up their way of thinking and looking at things. And I want to really highlight this, that it's important as a parent to model curiosity and discernment. And this, my friend, is the practical work of raising anti-racist children in an AI world. And you know what? These habits of questioning, noticing who and what is missing, it stays with them. It helps them have a fuller picture of what they're learning. It teaches them that the first answer is not always the complete answer. It teaches them that speed is not the same as wisdom. People are not problems to be studied from a distance. People have stories, histories, communities, and most importantly, they have dignity. And this helps them develop the muscle of compassion, which is formed in relationship. You see, a chatbot can be responsive. It can sound warm and it can affirm your child, but it doesn't need anything from your child. And by that, I mean, it doesn't ask them to share. It doesn't expect them to wait or apologize or listen to a story that takes time, notice someone's body language, or stay present when someone else's needs are different from their own. It's not asking them for anything. But real people do that. Real people have needs that interrupt your own. They have histories we may not know, and in the process, it requires us to really slow down and begin to pay attention. That's why the Reconciliation Week example, I have found it to be so meaningful here as I've been preparing this episode. You see, those children were not only receiving information, they were being exposed to a different kind of learning from real people. That's profoundly different from typing a question into a tool and expecting the first answer that comes back, to be correct and just accepting it. Again, I'm not saying never use AI tools. That would not be practical. I'm saying do not let the tool become the only voice. Your child still needs books, real conversations, friendships, and to be in community. They need to hear stories from people whose lives are different from theirs. And they also need to see you model this for them. And perhaps this is the most powerful message I want you to take away from this episode, that modeling aspect. This is also where I want to bring in the work of Maggie Walter, a Palawa woman and scholar whose work on indigenous data sovereignty helps us think more deeply about data, its power, and representation. She talks about 5D data. That is data about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that focuses on, and here are the 5Ds. It focuses on disparity, deprivation, disadvantage, dysfunction, and difference. In other words, data that can reduce a whole people to a problem. That idea is incredibly important in an AI world because AI is built on data. Who, what gets collected, how it is categorized, who gets to interpret it, and who gets reduced by it. It all shapes our perceptions. If children only encounter First Nations people, Black people, and people of color through deficit, crisis, harm, or disadvantage, they are not receiving the fullness of those communities. They are being taught to associate entire groups of people with problems. So, part of raising racially aware children is paying attention to the fullness of what they are exposed to. Are they only hearing about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in relation to trauma? Or are they also learning about culture, language, country, knowledge, leadership, resistance, and joy? Are they only learning about Africa through poverty and charity? Or are they also learning about history, creativity, scholarship, beauty, politics, music, the food, innovation? Are they only seeing Black children in books about racism, or are they also seeing Black children in stories about friendship, imagination, adventure, family, and everyday life? You see, children are constantly forming a picture of the world. AI will become one of the tools that contributes to that picture, but it should not be the only one, and it should never be treated as the final say or the final authority. So, where does this leave us as parents? I believe it leaves us with something that is both challenging but also hopeful. You do not need to get every conversation right. I don't get every conversation right. I'm human. I make mistakes all the time. Neither does your child. They don't need to get every conversation right. But what they do need is to see you keep learning. They need to see you say, I don't know. Let's find out from somebody who does. They also need to see you repair when you get something wrong because they learn through, again, I cannot stress this anymore, what is modeled to them. If your child says something racially insensitive, pause. Do not shame them. and ask something along the lines of, what made you think that? Where did you hear that? How do you think that might feel to someone else? What else could be true here? Should we learn a bit more before we repeat that? Those are such powerful and great opportunities to practice racial literacy. In an AI world, our children will need these skills more and more, not less. They will need to know how to question the answer, look for the missing story, notice who is being represented well and who isn't. Most of all, they need to see us doing the same work. Our children don't become anti-racist because we tell them to be. They are watching who we are becoming. They watch how we speak about people when they're not there. They watch how we respond to racism or laugh it off. In fact, in my previous podcast episode, number 111, I spoke about how comedy can lead to racial humiliation. Our children are watching to see whether we only care about racial justice when it is easy and convenient, like when it's in the headlines, when everyone's talking about it, or is this something that's woven in our family values? So yes, teach your children to question AI, to ask whose story is missing, not to confuse information with wisdom, to look for the people behind the data. Also, let them see you doing the work in your own life, in your business, in your leadership, and even in your own relationships. Raising anti-racist kids in an AI world begins with becoming the kind of adult who refuses to let convenience replace having genuine, true relationship. And you know what? That is the heart of what we do inside Represented. My 10-week program for values-led online business owners who want to build racially inclusive businesses with more depth, care, and accountability. We talk about your messaging, your client experience, leadership, decision-making, your use of AI, and the kind of space you are creating for the people you serve. The work reaches far beyond business. It shapes how you see, how you listen, how you repair, how you lead, and ultimately, how you end up living your life. And so, my friend, if something in today's episode is kind of tugging on your heart, I'd love to invite you to join the waitlist of Represented. You can head over right now to anigishuru.com/represented. That link is in the show notes, and just go ahead, add your name, and I will personally let you know when the doors open.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented from coast to coast.